So I'm pleased to have with me today two guests who everyone who watches Crowdsource the Truth should be familiar with. I've got Laurel Everly and Thomas Paine, of course, of True Pundit. Laurel, Thomas, how you guys doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good, Jason.
I'm glad you could both join me on such short notice. And of course, Thomas, I reached out to Laurel yesterday after there was a report first in the Daily Caller, but it was actually brought to my attention by a piece that you ran in TruePundit.com. And of course, we're talking about something that Chris Gowen brought up back in October at the last Imran Awan hearing there in Washington, D.C. Mr. Gowen had referred to a matter that is known as inadvertent disclosure, and he, in a rather threatening manner, basically told me that I had somehow, ruined this case by, Laurel, you recall, of course, where you and I took your evidence to the U.S. Capitol Police, and Mr. Gowen is now saying that the Capitol Police brought that evidence directly to him. Laurel, how do you feel about this?
I feel confused and kind of the same way I felt throughout, that the handling of the case by all people, all parties involved has been just disgusting. So that's how I feel.
And just to recap that a little bit, you had contacted me back in around September of 2017, after you had spoken with both Luke Rosiak of the Daily Caller and Sean Boberg of the Washington Post, and the FBI for that matter. And as I recall, one of the reasons you had reached out to me was that you were really frustrated that these guys weren't taking your story seriously. Is that correct?
Not so much not taking the story seriously, but just weren't interested in any of the concerns that I had relative to incidents with Imran, and also concerns over my electronic devices, etc. The idea that there might be evidence useful to them, or that I had been victimized in ways that I wasn't aware of. So.
Right. And the Capitol Police, they never told you what they found on that laptop that you and I brought to them, did they?
They didn't tell me what they found relative to the case that was under investigation. I asked them to reassure me from a personal point of view that I didn't have any concerns relating to law enforcement, because of course I hadn't done anything that I thought was unlawful in any way. And they did reassure me that that was the case. They said that the primary concern that I should have was identity theft, although they were non-specific about that. They were specific about their advice on how to correct or protect myself if I had been, if my identity had been stolen. So.
And Laurel, I'm sure you recall when I spoke with Chris Gowen on the street outside of the courthouse back in October. Did you see that video where I was asking Chris about the evidence that we found at the home you rented from Imran Awan over there at 4809 Sprayer Street?
I did see the video.
And Gowen, he knew about this inadvertent disclosure back in October when we had that encounter. I don't understand why Luke Rosiak is reporting on this yesterday as if it's some kind of breaking news. It really strikes me as sort of odd. Thomas, what do you think about that? What would be the reason behind that?
Well, there's a couple of larger issues before you get into Rosiak. He's kind of a small ball. But the larger issue is that you and Laurel took this laptop that she was concerned what was on it, like she explained. Whether her identity had been compromised or whether he had done something illicit on her computer, using her computer without her knowledge, that the feds could come kick the door in a year from now, or next year and say, hey, you did X, Y, and Z, and they would pin it on her. So she was rightfully concerned. So, and you're a journalist and you're dealing with her, so you went the extra mile and said, hey, we should take this thing to law enforcement. Like, they had this big thing, see something, say something.
Right.
So now it turns out when you see something and you say something and you do something, the police turn the evidence over to the suspect in a federal criminal case. They don't even give it to the federal prosecutors, right? And then the larger issue, the other larger issue, is that you may not have contemplated is this judge in the case has no control over this case whatsoever. To let this go and not be disclosed for 6 or 8 months or 10 months is out of control. The prosecutor should have been notified of this. I'm sure they were. But also, the court and the Capitol Police have a duty to notify Laurel that the evidence that she gave fell into the wrong hands, whether it was an accident or not, and they withheld that from her.
Wow.
Thinking that, maybe this will never be disclosed.
That was my comment, Thomas.
That
was my comment, if I might interrupt, is, Jason, you're asking the question, why is it being reported today, months after we heard this term inadvertent disclosure? And from my perspective, the reason it's being reported today is because what was included in the inadvertent disclosure was never reported to me or to anyone. That's new news. I had no idea until you forwarded the new news that was what the disclosure was. We heard that it had something to do with you and I, but what that specifically was, nobody knew. So,
and of course, we heard that through a very unofficial channel. That was just strictly from, basically menacing statements from Chris Gowen on the street there. He was telling me, you'll find out, and he was saying that I had screwed up the case. And I mean, look, everyone I think realizes that all that Laurel and I were trying to do was do the right thing. Laurel, I recall you and I spent a fair amount of time deliberating what to do with this laptop. We spoke about bringing it to the FBI, we spoke about bringing it to the Capitol Police, and ultimately you made what I felt was a very good decision to bring it to the Capitol Police, primarily because, remember, at that time, Andrew McCabe was the interim director of the FBI, and we felt that the FBI might be compromised if we brought this evidence to them.
Well, the FBI didn't want the evidence when I spoke to them as well. They didn't ask for it or have any interest in it. And also, it seemed at the time that the Capitol Police were interested in doing the right thing. They were looking at the broader implications, reference to Awan's activities within the House and so forth. And so, again, it just, whatever. I mean, the frustration is, again, that now I'm being notified that whatever was on my laptop, which, the report says Gowen characterizes as nothing and unimportant, but then why is it being, given to the defense, and why is it even being called evidence if it's unimportant? And why wasn't I notified, as Thomas just pointed out, that was what was inadvertently disclosed? The only statement that came out was Gowen's angered, conversation with you in the parking lot. So it's interesting.
Well, there was also somewhat of a conversation between Chris Gowen and Luke Rosiak that there's somewhat of a transcript in this article from yesterday in the Daily Caller, which is referenced in True Pundit, and in there they've got Gowen saying the cop came to Chris Gowen's office with a stack of papers. Then he came back and said, I thought you guys were the other party. He was very angry, but Gowen made copies. Now, aren't the attorneys, in this case, Gowen, Gowen, Rhodes, whatever, Leningrad and Silva, whatever they're called, aren't they supposed to not make copies of this stuff when they realize that it's inadvertently disclosed? Why are they making copies so quickly when this cop arrives? Thomas, what do you think
Well,
of
they
that?
should be entitled to that. They should be entitled to that information anyhow during discovery, right? But how it's supposed to work is the prosecution gets the copy, gets it first, and then they're able to glean from it what they feel is important, right? And then they can put everything on a disc and give it to the defense. But it gives the prosecution time to help build a case, structure the case. They can interview witnesses, they can subpoena other records and things like that to build the case up from what was found on the laptop. When the Capitol Police deliver it to the defense first, it takes away the prosecution's ability to build out the case from it. And it really is like, you know, kicking a table leg out from under them. It gives, you know, whether you're not supposed to make copies or not, any good attorney is going to make copies because they have their client's best interest in mind, and their best interest is, let's get copies of this thing before they come and realize they made a mistake and they come pick it up. So I mean, it's smart lawyering. You can't really, you know, what's morally acceptable and what's legal are two different things in the world of a lawyer. So my point is that the case is almost compromised when a situation happens like that, and it's not Gowen's position to say whether there's evidence that's germane to the case. Of course he's going to say there's nothing that was found. He's going to minimize it and things. I would think that if he was in a rush to make copies from, you know, taking a summary review of it, there probably was some things he wanted to get, you know, to get copies of, which would probably mean that there was evidence on there that
was something.
Is the opposite of what he says.
Right.
It is germane to the case, right?
Right.
The other thing is, what the hell is going on with the Capitol Police? I mean, they shattered the chain of custody here. I mean, it's you know, I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like I worked a criminal prosecution case of prosecutors in a state, and they would make mistakes like this on purpose to ruin cases. Like evidence would go missing. In capital murder cases, some evidence would go missing. Drugs would end up missing, and then when it came, you know, time in a major robbery case where someone shot, like something from the store that had fingerprints, like a cash register, would be missing. Then when the case came up for trial, and they went to pull the evidence, there was no evidence that was on the, you know, the evidence sheet and the evidence docket, and the defense attorneys would say, if you don't have the fingerprints and you don't have the weapon, you know, I'm going to make a motion to dismiss the case, and then the cases would get thrown out. These are capital cases. So when you see a mistake,
I'm going to suggest to two experts, not being an expert myself, that this case or these cases of missing evidence or mishandled evidence, you know, can be linked a lot to particular persons and parties involved in this case and a number of others. So it's interesting that, you know, once again, we've, you know, destroyed evidence or made it, you know, unuseful or whatever it is. It seems to be the way of things. So,
it is astounding. It does seem to be a common occurrence in this matter related to Mr. Awan. Let's refer for a second to this Luke Rosiak article, because he does say that Michael Miranda alluded to the disclosure of evidence in court on October 6th. And Miranda had said at that time, earlier this week, meaning October, there was the inadvertent disclosure of law enforcement materials to defense counsel. There may be a motion on that, and I should check Pacer to see if there has been a motion. But Luke goes on to say in yesterday's article, another disclosure may have occurred after the Daily Caller News Foundation emailed the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia for comment on the story. 3 hours after spokesman Bill Miller was contacted, Gowen emailed the Daily Caller. And he says, I hear you're writing another article about me. I assume you don't want to fact check it, Gowen wrote. From what I hear, you have it totally wrong, as usual. The Daily Caller had not told anyone other than the spokesman about the upcoming story involving Gowen. and the Daily Caller followed up with Miller to ask if prosecutors had provided that information to Gowen. And Mr. Miller said, "I'm not going to get into what we do internally, but I really don't know why that would be the case." Now, another question that I had asked, I think his name is Jesse Silva, when we were walking down the street.
Yeah, these
Jesse
guys are
was
just sitting around. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I just asked Jesse if Sean Boberg was working for the Washington Post or for Gowen, Rhodes, Winograd, and Silva, and he seemed very nervous to me in his response to that question. But I asked it because it seemed like things were happening in coordination, just like Luke Rosiak describes right here. It seems, Thomas, that after you and I and Susan Lutsky Holmes did an expose of evidence that Laurel had provided, evidence of a Cox Cable high-speed internet account previously unknown there at 4809 Sprayer Street that seemed like it could be providing congressional data to a secret server hidden in the shed that Laurel had described. There was an article in the Washington Post the next day saying that there was no evidence at 4809 Sprayer, when in fact there was.
Well, these guys are obviously, there's a back channel of communication that's going on. There's supposed to be a wall, like an invisible wall between reporters and prosecutors and things. You're not on their team. In other words, if I'm writing about a case, I see the prosecutor as the enemy almost. They're going to protect X, Y, and Z, and the defense attorney is the same thing. They're going to have their own interests to protect, and I have my interests to protect. I'm trying to get to the truth, and I don't want to be friends with either one of you.
Right.
Because if I have to tear one of you apart, I don't have any moral decision making. I'm just going to rip you to shreds, and that's just the way it is, and that's part of the game. So when there's this back channel between prosecutors and even defense attorneys, I mean, I find it strange that Gowen gets tipped off by the U.S. attorney that a news organization is making inquiries. I mean, who the hell are these guys? You know, I mean, there's one. It appears there's one side here, and it's not in the public's best interest to have one side. There's supposed to be different sides, obviously, in a court case, and that tells me that nothing's going to happen with this Awan case. If these guys are this chummy, they've probably already cut deals. I mean, where the hell's the wife? She took off. They said, "Oh, we're trying to get her back. We're trying to, we're going to extradite a deal." She's not coming back here. What do they think they're dealing with? A bunch of idiots? I mean, we know that she's not coming back here. Why in the hell would she step on an airplane to come back here and go to prison?
Right.
So, and the FBI let her flee at the airport.
Right.
You know, Comey and McCabe said, "Cut her loose, let her go back." She was with the mother-in-law. She was with her mother, Imran's mother-in-law, and the kids, and a bunch of boxes of duct tape clothes. $12,000 of cash. And they said, let her go back. Don't worry about it. So,
if I'm not mistaken, she may have come back and appeared at one of those hearings, or she did actually. But I don't know if she's still in the country. I don't know anything, honestly. It's all quite confusing. I did want to say, though, reference to, the possibilities of secret servers in the locked shed and potential evidence on the laptop and everything else. I and Jason and nobody drew any conclusions. We just delivered the information or the things that seemed suspicious, as Thomas said, see something, say something, to authorities who were supposed to be investigating, tracking down, and determining what was a true concern or was a crime or was real evidence. And we're all kind of left wondering at every turn what's going on. Like Thomas said, if there's one thing I can say about all of it, my initial and gut reaction to the latest article is a vote of no confidence for everyone, all the way around: the media, the Department of Justice, FBI, law enforcement in general, the House. I could make you a list as tall as I am of everything that nobody should have any confidence in at this point, because it's been a circus the way this has been dealt with, and it's everybody should be disgusted with it. what the average citizen just trying to do the right thing is put through it's preventative, as I said, from my initial, week's worth of nightmare, just trying to deliver evidence to the authorities. So
it was definitely
no confidence.
an ordeal.
That's what I have to say. So,
Laurel, let me take you back
Thomas,
for a
anything
moment.
will happen. I don't believe anything will happen, Thomas, at this point. I have no faith. So.
Let me take you back for a
is-
moment. Sorry, Thomas. Laurel, let me just ask you real briefly.
Just real quick.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, the struggle is that our parents raised us in a certain way. Their parents raised them in a certain way. So we are, 40s and 50s. So we're a different generation, right? When we think that if we do the right thing, things will turn out okay. If you approach something from a standpoint using honesty as the foundation, things will work out. It's so corrupt now that the tables are tilted. That's almost a ridiculous way of thinking. Because when you do the right thing, when you do the things that you're supposed to do, nothing happens. Everything that you would expect not to happen to enhance the situation to someone like an Imran Awan happens.
Yeah.
And you're standing there wondering, geez, am I going to get charged next? I mean, this is so crazy. Is that the next thing the FBI is going to knock on my door and I'm going to be in trouble? And it's just
I don't have that.
corruption.
I don't even have that fear, honestly. I mean, I am just the average person and have maintained throughout. I can't begin to imagine how or what they might think that I did that was incorrect. If there had been any guidance from the authorities or the powers that be, and believe me, I asked for it, on how they'd like me to handle the things that I had concerns with, I would have followed it. And like you said, I'm of the generation you're naming, and I just, went in blindly with faith that you do the right thing and the right things happen. And for a long time, I maintained or held on to the belief that ultimately the bad guys would get what was coming to them and they'd find out what really happened and all of that. And it just, it's drug on and on and on. Here we are almost in June. The last hearing was supposed to take place in November before Thanksgiving, and it hasn't. So,
Yeah, it's been delayed until
No,
June
you're right.
7th. But on this note, I want to take you back, Laurel, to when you were first in communication with Sean Boberg and Luke Rosiak. Luke actually encouraged you to speak to Sean, right?
Let's see. I spoke to Sean first, and then I spoke to Luke. And when Sean got back to me after Luke printed an article that had my name in it and wanted to talk at that point, I, reached out to Luke and said, why should I respond to this guy now? He had no interest in the things I was trying to say to him that were a concern to me. And he said, no, any coverage is good coverage. Attention needs to be brought to the case, so go ahead and talk to him again. So I did, but
Because
when
I
I
recall,
talked to him, when I talked to Sean again, he wanted to know who at the FBI I had spoken to, wanted their name and their telephone number, and then told me that he had let Miranda's office know about me. He really had no questions and still didn't want to address anything I was saying. He just wanted more or less to threaten me. So
right. Yeah, well, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, do you find it interesting that you presented Sean Boberg with really a trove of evidence that you would think a journalist for the Washington Post would be interested in, but he didn't actually publish anything about this until 4 days after our video expose entitled Hidden Network Topology at 4809 Sprayer Street, and Sean Boberg's article in response to that. Our report was on September 12th, 2017. This very flattering photograph of Imran Awan, which our spot-on crew of crowdsource community at large determined was taken right across the street from Gowen, Rhodes, Winograd, and Silva, Imran's defense attorneys. They could tell by this distinctive street lamp and the colors and layout of these buildings behind him, despite the very soft focus background, this fashion photography technique, people could tell that this was taken right outside Imran's defense attorney's office. And the photograph contained EXIF metadata indicating the photograph, this photo, was taken the very next day on September 13th. And this article, which Sean Boberg thinks yields no evidence of espionage, this article came out in response to our report that revealed that Imran had a Cox Cable high-speed internet account there at the house that you were renting, Laurel. This internet account was unknown to you, and if it wasn't for your son's skateboarding in the basement, we would never have known about it. I find it very strange that these guys did not report on this at all.
Right. Well, I still say, whether that has any relevance to the case, is a question. I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought or hoped, not just reporters, but law enforcement would have concluded something and, shared that with the prosecutors or whatever. Again, the excuse that you get from every person that you talk to that's official is that it's an ongoing investigation and they can't discuss it. So perhaps it had some relevance, perhaps it didn't. I don't know the answer to that. I wish that, again, there were conclusions sometime before now and that it just didn't remain so mysterious on all fronts. It's not really fair. In the meantime, again, anybody, I'm not the only one, it's true. I'm sure Thomas as well. Anybody that comes forward that says or shows anything that goes against the official narrative is made out to be all kinds of things they're not. And so, again, I don't want to be tagged again with reaching any conclusions. I had my experiences with Imran. I expressed, my feelings about his character based on what I dealt with him and those kind of things, which I thought was important because, the official story was that he was being victimized himself somehow, which,
right.
That
we're ruining his life.
Right. And so, I felt like it was important to say that, no, this is not some, buttoned up kind of, upstanding guy that's been victimized somehow. There's good reason to question his activities and his behaviors and all of that stuff. But again, there's been no official reporting, if there's been any follow through to get to the bottom of it and to say officially. I mean, and again, none of us are judges, so we don't get to participate in what ultimately is found for him, but, put all the proper evidence in front of somebody that's got integrity and, put an end to this finally. I mean, how long has it gone on? I realize there's a lot to look at, but it's, from my point of view, what I gave was very little. It should be a pretty cut and dry thing, and to be exposed the way that I have with this inadvertent disclosure, I'm not really worried about anything per se, because I feel like if he hacked me to begin with, all the information that they gave to his attorney, he probably already had. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And what I'm showing right now, Laurel, is the photo evidence that you had provided of a Cox Cable internet router. And we see the white coaxial cable coming into a black internet cable modem. We see an RJ45 cable coming out of it, going to another plug on the wall, and we see an AC power cord coming in there. And of course, Thomas, you were involved with us on the original broadcast where we showed this on September 12th. You've got a ton of experience in investigative journalism and in law enforcement investigations, how these things are supposed to operate. Laurel gave us firsthand testimony that she had spoken with Imran about a locked shed off the garage that this high-speed internet cable modem could have been providing high-speed data to. She also gave us testimony that Imran was substantially upset when he learned about a flood in the basement that could have potentially disabled this piece of equipment. This certainly seems like at least an element of evidence that could be evidence of espionage, contrary to what Sean Boberg is saying. Thomas, isn't it incredibly conspicuous that Sean Boberg and Luke Rosiak and, of course, George Webb went to 4809 Sprayer Street shortly after we reported about this, made a point of showing the other shed in the backyard, but specifically avoided this garage shed. Don't you find it incredibly conspicuous, Thomas, that there's been no reporting on this photographic evidence from the basement at 4809 Sprayer Street, where we saw a Cox cable internet router, and Sean Boberg has said nothing about it. Sean Boberg, but that certainly seems like evidence of espionage, but he publishes an article to the contrary.
Well, I remember that we had put together some intelligence that Awan still had that Cox cable box active long after he moved out. So
Yes.
it was sitting there, and the account was still active. I don't know if you had pointed that out. So
Yeah.
why was it still active? You know, usually when you move out of a house, you call the cable company. You're like, yeah, listen, I'm going to XYZ address. I need my cable.
Well, why would the landlord have
why
an
would-
internet account at a house that he's not even at when Laurel had a separate Verizon Wi-Fi account that she
Well,
used?
that's what I'm saying. You have to put why is that box in the basement and the box is hot? You know, what's it being used for? I mean,
My question is that why didn't they
cable
answer the question? Why didn't they answer the question then? If it's nothing at all, which it may very well be, then why wasn't it quickly, a follow-up on that piece of evidence or alleged evidence, and this is what was found? I don't understand why it takes so long to reach a conclusion. It raises the question, so answer the question. If it's not a part of the case, then what's the harm in responding to it? I'm just confused completely by all of it. So I have no idea what the relevance of anything I gave was, and it would sure be nice to finally know. So,
Thomas, what do you think the relevance of this cable box is?
Well, I think that, the cable boxes, it wasn't, whether it's relevant or not, it wasn't, they didn't follow protocols on a piece of key evidence, like where was the FBI, where were the people that come over and look at this thing, put it in a bag, subpoena the cable company, find out what kind of data was flying through there, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't seem like there was any rush or any pressure to do that. It's just basic follow-throughs. But, I was thinking about the Gowen thing. If you took at the timeline, we did this cable box thing, and then the Washington, this big story, right?
Right.
About, there was no evidence of any criminality.
Right.
But at that point, Gowen knew that from your YouTube, from Crowdsourcing Truth, Gowen knew that this had already been, had already happened. And then he also knew from Crowdsourcing Truth that you guys turned this laptop over to Capitol Police because you broadcasted it.
Right.
It was like live. So he likely ended up with those records because he made inquiries out of school. He jumped the gun, and instead of contacting directly the U.S. attorney saying, look, we want this evidence, he probably contacted Capitol Police and said, what the hell is going on? When he really should have funneled his correspondences through the U.S. attorney. The Capitol Police may have gotten confused and didn't know what was going on, and there was maybe a clerical error, and that's how he ended up with it. But I was thinking he ended up with that likely because he jumped the gun and didn't go through proper channels, and that's what's confusing. That's what's screwing up this case. He made the mistake, not you.
Interesting. And I mean, of course,
That
I'm
makes
not a
any sense.
lawyer, so how could I inadvertently disclose anything?
right.
Well,
I
he's
said
not
the same
supposed to
thing.
have
How could
any
we have made
contact with-
how could we have made any mistake? We didn't make the mistake. If it was the Capitol Police that turned it over, inappropriately, that was their mistake. If it was Gowen that requested it out of school, and that was his mistake. If it was Miranda's office doing something wrong, that's their mistake. How in the world did Jason and I screw up a case anyway? If it's non-evidence, then what does it have to do with anything? Why hasn't it been resolved already then? A motion filed or something relative to the stuff that doesn't matter at all, according to them. So,
Well, I guess we'll just have to
situation
watch
because-
this case and see how it develops, right? I mean, what's the next step? June 7th, there's another hearing, right, Thomas?
Well, you think.
Right.
Until that gets kicked again. It's been delayed 6 times, right? So, I mean, 5, 6 times. So, like I said, this judge is not running a good case. She's corrupt. We've written her and her connections to Obama and Hillary Clinton, and it's ridiculous that she should even be on this case.
Wow.
It's a disgrace. She's not running a good case. The fact that this keeps getting delayed, the fact that this happened and it wasn't fully disclosed in unsealed documents and things like that. I mean, this is a serious problem with evidence and chain of custody. And just real quick, if I could add, the only way that ends up in Gowen's office is that he stuck his nose where it shouldn't have been, because the Capitol Police would have never been given any type of address linked to a defense attorney, because the Capitol Police's chain of custody should go right to Department of Justice. Gowen should not be involved at all. So whether somebody stopped by the office and gave the improper, address or whatever, that's Gowen's doing. That's not the U.S. attorney. So it makes me feel that Gowen tampered a little bit where he shouldn't have, and maybe he made his own luck. He can always wash it off to, we didn't do anything, but, behind the scenes, if you look at the paperwork and the emails and the phone calls, I would venture a guess almost 100% he had his hand in it.
Wow. That's pretty interesting for sure.
But there's no way for him to be, he's not in the chain of custody. It goes from Capitol Police. You take a look at it. They want to do something and kick it to the feds, because it's the feds' case. The Capitol Police did bring the case. It's not a D.C. case. It's a federal case. The evidence then goes to the FBI or the Department of Justice or, the prosecutors. Gowen gets it after that. The prosecution gets to see the evidence, because it's law enforcement-based evidence before the defense attorney does. So the fact that the defense attorney ends up with it, to me, means that something happened. And that's what, you remember he flipped out on you on the streets, like, you messed up the case.
Right.
Yeah, he's projecting. He's projecting because he was probably under a lot of hot water.
Right. That's what I detected without knowing any of this stuff that you're describing, but it seemed that way. He was pissed off at me for screwing up his case.
Some prosecutor somewhere along the line is going to say, how the hell did he end up with this? What did he do? How did they get his address? And they call the Capitol Police. The Capitol Police say, hey, this guy's been calling here like every week saying, where's the stuff? Where's the stuff? So we got mixed up, or there was an error. And he was under some duress at that point for screwing up the case, not you. He was projecting a little bit. That's what I think. That's what I think.
Well, and of course, yesterday, True Pundit went as far as calling this matter rigged and doubting the nature of the accidental delivery of the evidence. And what you're saying now helps us understand that more clearly.
Well, it's unheard of. I mean, you don't deliver law enforcement evidence to the suspect, to the defense attorney, before the prosecution gets a shot at it.
Right.
It's
really
insane.
Crazy.
You're crippling the case. And not only that, that evidence probably can't even be used, because Gowen could bring a motion to say, hey, we don't know where this chain of custody is. Where was it at before it went to here? How do we know that the Capitol Police didn't deliver it to a bagel shop on K Street?
Wow.
How do we know that?
So is that what you think they'd be trying to do to negate the value of this evidence?
When I said earlier that people can tank criminal cases, corrupt organizations can tank criminal cases in different ways with evidence, it falls in line with that. It just seems too crazy not to be on purpose, or somebody pampered, whether it was Gowen or Gowen Associates or whatever, trying to get the evidence before Department of Justice could have it, because he's going off of your feed. He knows that day that that laptop is sitting in there. So if he starts firing off letters and stuff, then there's a mix-up. Maybe it just ends up on his doorstep, and lo and behold, it ends up on his doorstep. I mean, this is not how the Justice Department.
You would hope, but it makes me question, the integrity of the police department and their connections to the larger, whatever scandal and
Right.
whatever criminality was going on in the house and everything else. Was it, again, done on purpose on their part for some
Right.
reason, for the
Even
defense's
just one-
sake? I have no idea. And what would the purpose be, honestly? And, again, from my perspective, unless he used my laptop for something, or unless they found some evidence as far as, I guess, the connection of my laptop to networks on that property or something like that, then what is the relevance of the information taken off my laptop? My laptop was a personal computer that I used for work that wasn't connected to the government or anything else, and then personal things. Again, perhaps some of my let's say financial information and things like that could be on there, which disclosing that and not notifying me that you did inadvertently or otherwise is, that's a concern. So like you said, what if they dropped it off at the coffee shop and they had all of my demographic information and could start, doing whatever with it? So it's...
And of course, Laurel, you and I have been in communication since all this occurred about infrequent but recurring sightings on your part of Imran Awan at the gas station and various places that you've been. Is that correct?
I have come face to face with him twice in and under strange circumstances. Very, unsettling the way that it's taken place. So yeah, there's been that, and just a lot of strange stuff goes on with strange telephone calls and strange things happening with devices or computers, and it's been a weird odyssey. You wonder whether you perceive things happening that, just out of paranoia, or if, things are happening truly because of some link to this case. So, but coming into contact with Imran the first time was within 4 or 5 feet of him, and then the second time was just kind of him in a vehicle, me out of a vehicle, him passing through for no particular reason, it seemed. I held up my phone like I was going to take a picture, and he was gone before I could get my camera up. So, but it was under strange circumstances, and so it makes me afraid. That too. I mean, again, I'm saying no confidence. Citizens should think about that. Where's the protection for the people that are trying to do the right thing, and the concern for our privacy, our safety, anything. I wonder a lot about that. So.
I just can't get past the feeling that this photographic evidence of a high-speed internet connection, coupled with your testimony about what was possibly inside that shed off the garage, it seems like these two really important pieces of evidence and your laptop, there's just a lot of effort on the part of several people to eliminate those items as evidence from the case. So I guess at this point we'll just have to wait and see what happens next, but it's just so much intrigue surrounding everything having to do with Imran Awan and this matter of information leaving the Congress.
Well, McCabe was running the op. I mean, McCabe was running the FBI. So, what we know about McCabe now, I mean,
right?
He's gonna push for a prosecution to make Hillary look bad or Wasserman Schultz. It's not going to happen. He was partisan. He was part of their cabal. He was a protector or a fixer.
What do you think about McCabe receiving $500,000 through GoFundMe right after he was fired from the FBI, Thomas?
Well, I just want to point. It's what are you going to do? It's a kick in the face to everybody who follows the rules every day.
But is that legitimate money, or is that somebody paying him off through the internet to shut up?
Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, if you're working hard and you see something like that, okay, and you have common sense, it's just a kick in the stomach to honest, hard-working Americans. Somebody could be rewarded That way, whether it's individual, whether it's bundled through politics, whatever the case is, right? It's a kick in the gut, and it just exacerbates the frustration of the country with this whole FBI corruption. The other thing I just want to say real quick is, Gowen says that he got copies, paper copies, delivered to him. To me, that tells me that, excuse me, Capitol Police didn't make an electronic copy or image of the laptop, of the hard drive, because if they did, they wouldn't be delivering papers. They would be delivering 4 or 5 CD-ROMs with everything on it, like the feds do. That's how the feds work. So if they didn't make a copy of the hard drive, okay, or they only made paper copies, and they turn this laptop over to Gowen, he can go in and blank whatever he wants. I mean, I'm not saying he did, but technically he could before he has to turn it back over to the feds. So evidence that was on there that wasn't preserved by the Capitol Police could just inadvertently vanish and never make it to the feds. Because maybe the Capitol Police weren't looking for things that have to do with bank fraud and other things. They were looking for things that do with identity theft. So they didn't run sweeps on it for, fraud or financial fraud. So when you break the chain of custody, the Gowen can make, the argument that this thing could have been anywhere. We don't know where this computer is.
So effectively just eliminating
it's
it as evidence.
Well, it was
Absolutely.
given back to me. It was given back to me.
Well, but once the chain of what Thomas is saying, if I understand it correctly, Laurel, is that once the chain of custody is broken like that, Gowen can point to it and say nothing on it is valid because it could have been erased, things could have been added to it, etc. It's just a way to sort of foul your potentially significant evidence.
Right. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
again, I
evidence.
did everything from my point of view to try and protect it. As soon as it was given back to me, it was secured in case it ever needs to be examined. So there's that, but not that makes a difference in a case. Honestly, again, a resolution, Thomas, I'm with you. I doubt very seriously anything will happen. There's, somehow or another, they're just going to sweep it under the rug and whatever, and it's going to be a chapter in frustration for everybody that tried to follow it, tried to understand what happened or what went on. So, that's where I'm at. I'd love to hear from someone official. It's been a very long time, and the official parties all seem to be ignoring or not caring or hiding or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, or destroying the evidence.
Right.
It's terrible.
So, anyway, I've
say
got to hop off the phone.
Federal system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks both of you for joining
go
me.
ahead. I hope maybe you, with your expertise and your knowledge of the case, which, again, I haven't followed all of this. I've made a point not to follow all of it. You guys might have better insight, but from my perspective, it's just, bizarre to 8 months or 9 months later come to this point where what was inadvertently disclosed is, information from my laptop, which was never discussed with me in any way. So all very strange. But anyway. Well,
Laurel, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your input. I hope everything is going well for you, and thanks for everything you've done up until this point.
I'm doing good. I hope you guys are too. So
Absolutely.
Take care.
All right. Have a great evening, Laurel. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
And Thomas, anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
Just real quick, working with defense attorneys in the federal system, delays always benefit them. Every time you get a delay on something, like a little victory, add up 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 delays, you're winning.
The defense is winning.
The public, the case is removed from the public spotlight. People get sick of it. The delays, there's not as much attention. So you win. And then, eventually, when it's not as hot or not as a big issue, you can settle it, or it can, for your client, it's a much better thing every time you delay, and that's what they've been doing. That's what the judges allow them to do.
Yeah.
And that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to run out the clock. And, I have to be honest with you. we don't care about writing about the Awans anymore because I know exactly how this case is going to go. So there's other corruption to write about. If I know that this is like the fix is in on this and we've set our piece, I'm going to cover other stuff, you know, because we don't have unlimited resources. And I think that's kind of like the public psyche, too. It's like, whether it's Las Vegas or whether it's Imran Awan, it's like, this case is rigged, man. Yeah, we got to look at other stuff. We're wasting our breath on this one. This is out of our reach. There's something going on here that's illicit, and we can't really get a handle on it, but it's not good, and it's not honest. So
yeah, well, I mean, I want to take that opportunity to remind people to go to truepundit.com. There's a lot of great reporting there about corruption within the DOJ. Of course, Thomas was talking about the Las Vegas case. You guys have done great work on that, great work on the Awans, and there are limited resources, so I would encourage readers of True Pundit to click on that sponsorship tab and support the work of our friends there at True Pundit. Thomas, you've been a great help in discovering this evidence at 4809 Sprayer Street and helping us to get the word out. So it's important that people who appreciate True Pundit sponsor it by going on to truepundit.com and clicking on that sponsorship button. I do also want to remind people that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource. So if you're watching the broadcasts daily, if you're watching right now and you're not yet a sponsor, even for just $1 a month, please do that. It's very important that we have your ongoing sponsorship to keep the shows coming. I want to thank Thomas Paine for joining me today. Thomas, please keep up the great work. I'm looking at True Pundit every day, and I always appreciate your input.
I appreciate you reaching out to me because, you know, these are interesting times, man. I mean, we're living in historic times. We'll look back on this for years to come, and some kind of levee is going to break somewhere in D.C. Either we're going to get this cleaned up or that we're going to have some serious civil unrest. So, you know, it's historic. It's historic times, and it's hard to keep up. And, you know, and it's also hard to realize that what is going on is out of the ordinary because there's a good versus evil thing going on, and it's big time. And for people that don't keep up in the news, you know, they don't realize what's going on, but we're living in historic times. Things are going to be decided in the next couple of years, and the country's going to go one way or the other, either good or bad. So we're like along for the ride like a lot of other people. You know, we try to lead the way with some breaking news and things like that, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Well, thanks for being here with us, Thomas. I look forward to our next conversation very soon. Have a great weekend, and I'll see everybody later tonight.
All right, man. I'll talk to you.
Thanks.